Hi guys, and welcome to this next video build series, and in this one we're going to be taking a look at and building the ICM T-34 76 early 1943 production World War II Soviet medium tank. So I picked this kit because I've not built a 35th scale tank since the Tamiya Panther, which was quite some time ago, it was a good few years ago, and then I built a couple of smaller ones just sort of messing around and what have you. But I decided I'd start with a relatively simple one on the 35th scale because I didn't want to dive into something too detailed. I do have an AFV Club T-34 85 with interior, which I'm looking forward to building, and I have a Revell Stern Tiger, which I'm also looking forward to building. But this particular one is a relatively straightforward build. So I'm gonna the box art's very simple. You've literally got what you've got on the front, a little bit of blurb information on the side, and then on the bottom, rather, this bit here, and then on the top you've got one of the colour schemes, which is the one that I'm probably going to be building, I think, because I quite like the decals on this one. And when you're building tanks, you generally don't get a huge choice of decals, whereas with this one you've got gives you a little bit of something to add on. So we'll pop the lid off. Now, as you can see, these aren't in bags because this is a pre-owned kit. It's a complete unstarted one, but obviously whoever had it before took the stuff out of the bags and discarded them. So what we've got is the sprues wrapped in cling film. So what I'm going to do next is zoom in closely, and we'll have a good close-up look at the sprues once I've unwrapped them all. Just before we look at the kit parts, as we normally do, we're going to have a quick look at the instructions. We've got a really nice replication of the box art on the front of the instructions, and a bit of information on the tank in I don't know if this is that Russian or possibly Polish or Czechoslovakian, because I think ICM may be Czechoslovakian. Correct me if I'm wrong on that one, I'm not 100% sure. However, quick bit of information. T-34 76, the most numerous and famous tank in the world's history, was the Soviet T-34. It was designed in Design Bureau of Kharkov Plant number 183 under the leadership of M.I. Koshkin. Its serial production was launched in 1940. It was the first mass production medium tank with anti-projectile armour, powerful diesel engine and 76.2mm long-barrelled gun. It was the world's best tank up until the end of 1941. The modification with the improved hexagonal cast turret known as a nut was in production since 1942. T-34 with 76.2 F-34 gun, millimetre F-34 gun, was the main Soviet medium tank up to the end of 1944, when it was replaced by the more powerful armed T-34 85. They were produced 35,467 T-34 76 tanks in 6 plants in 1940 to 44. So 35,000 plus tanks in 4 years. That's quite a number, as you can imagine. And I don't know how accurate all of this information is because I'm not that well up on tanks, but I do know, as most of you will, that the T-34 was the reason for the design of the Panther with the sloped frontal armour, the sloped glacis plate, effectively giving a much broader thickness of armour because of the slope, and much better projectile deflection and protection because of the sloped armour. And prior to this, of course, the German tank design had been using flat plates like the Panzer IV and the Tiger. And down at the bottom here we've got some colour callouts in model master colour numbers. And then opening the instructions, much to my delight, we see a sprue callout. I love kits that have sprue callouts, I really do, and it annoys me no end when I get a kit that doesn't have a sprue callout, so it's not quite so easy to check and reference the sprues. Now when you get a brand new kit, it's generally not a problem because you assume that the sprues that you're getting are complete. However, I have had new kits before where there have been parts missing, but certainly when you buy a second-hand kit, the first thing that I always do is check that the sprues are complete, and I open the box and check everything through. I do this with a new kit as well, just to make sure, because it could be months before I actually open a kit to build. Sometimes I see a kit that's a bargain and I buy it, and it could be a long time before I actually intend to build it, so I want to make sure it's complete, just in case, because I don't want to open it months down the line and find out there are bits missing and then have problems getting the spares or getting it replaced. So this gives you the sprue callouts, much like the Revell kits and a few others do, and it shows you what you get in the box, and you can cross-reference that with your plastic and see what you need. These blocked out red squares are the bits that you don't need for this particular kit, so effectively these will become spare parts. And the next page then goes on to the assembly, starting with the upper hull. And following on from there, upper hull to the lower hull and suspension components, the torsion bar suspension components, then the mating of the two hull parts. In the middle we have the decals, and with these interesting sort of Russian Red Star decals that will go on the turret on the version, on the variant that I will probably build. Then the road wheels, and what comes next? The tracks, which are vinyl type tracks, which you'll see in a moment. Oddly in two sets of two, so you actually join two pairs together to make a full length track, unlike the Tamiya ones, which tend to be just one long rubber band track with one joining section. So that'll be interesting to see how they go. The detail on them is quite nice for the waffle pattern on the track. So, but we'll see how they fit and how realistic they look once on. And then onto the turret assembly, and then onwards to the final little accessories, the sort of tarp rolls and external fuel tanks and that kind of thing. And then, the tow lines and what have you. And then we have the variants. We've got winter camouflage, which is obviously a winter whitewash, which I won't be doing because I quite fancy trying one of those at some point, but right at this moment I actually prefer the look of just the plain green armoured ones. And I think it's going to be this variant I'm going to go with these decals, just simply because it's a bit more interesting than this or this variant, and there are more decals to use, and for no other reason than that. So that's the instructions. We'll now have a look at the kit contents. So the first thing we're going to take a look at are the rubber band tracks, and as you can see here, the detail on these is really nice. And something else that I like is that, as you can see there, the profile is actually very thin and very in keeping with the scale, whereas the Tamiya ones can sometimes look a little bit too thick, I think, personally. And I think the moulding of these, even the inner side, is actually really nice. And as I say, you'll get two sets of two of these, and then in addition to that, at the bottom, this is the tow line, which is also moulded in rubber, which is a little bit of a shame in the respect that I'm not sure how well it's going to hold paint, because it's something that you're really going to want to paint before you place it on the tank, so I don't know how that's going to go at the moment. But back to the tracks, I mean, the pattern on the tracks is very nice, and there's a few little nubs to trim off, but I think they will look quite good once they've actually had a coat of paint, a wash and what have you, once they've been applied. And as I say, you get 2 sets of 2 in the bag. We'll pop those to one side and we'll take a look at the sprues. There are 2 sets. Let's pop these others down here out of the way just for the moment. There are 2 sets of, I'll just show you the rear of these. So obviously you've got things like eject pin marks and what have you, and register marks like these dots here and what have you. But these won't be visible because this is where the wheels clamp together. So the important side, the bit that you're going to see, the bit that's going to be visible, is very nicely moulded, very clean and crisp moulding. And one of the things that I do like about this kit so far is everything seems quite nicely in scale. The parts that, some parts can look very, very thick and unrealistically thick for the armour modelers. I've noticed, especially some of the early Tamiya kits, some of the armour can look very, very thick. And if you look back at the last video series I did, the Panzer Kampfwagen 3 72nd scale one, if you actually look at the fenders on that, they are ridiculously overscale. Now, had I been bothered, I could have thinned those down at the risk of damaging them, but you know, for a kit that small, for a scale that small, it's kind of a case of, is it really worth the hassle? But anyway, so far the scale of these and the detail seems to be very, very good and quite accurate, and the moulding on the road wheels is very, very clean and crisp. The rubber road wheels that you see here, and then the steel ones that you see here, the rubber ones are actually moulded as part of the road wheel, which is normal for a lot of kits, and that will require masking or hand painting of the rubber road wheel or something similar. And then you've got the drive wheels and idler wheels over here accordingly. And this particular kit uses, I think it's, is it 3 sets of steel wheels and 2 rubber ones per side, I think. Let me just double check. Yeah, it's 3 pairs of steel wheels in the centre, 2 rubber road wheels at either end, and then the idler wheel and the drive wheel at front and rear respectively. So you get 2 sprues of this particular set, obviously 1 for each side. We'll pop that down there out of the way. Taking a look at the next sprue, we have various parts of the hull, the upper hull assembly. So we've got the spare track links up here, and we've got the rear plate, the sloping rear plate of the tank. Let's make sure that's nice, that's in focus. There we go. Sloping rear plate of the tank, and then down here we've got this bit with the moulded grill mesh, which will need an oil wash to bring that out. Some bits for the drive wheels there, and various little bits and pieces, some very fine sort of rails up here. I'm not sure what they're for exactly at the moment, but they'll have to be handled carefully because they're obviously very delicate. And then down here we've got the steering levers, because this has a kind of partial interior, in as much as it has the 2 front seats that the gunner and the driver would sit in, and the absolute most basic of components, i.e. the 2 seats, the machine gun and the 2 steering levers, which are visible through the driver's hatch if left open. So it's kind of nice that it's got that, because it has got a little bit of an interior. And then just up here we've got the mantlet, and I don't know how visible that's going to be on the video, but that actually has a really nice cast kind of design. Let me try and get this close and focus. You can hopefully you can see that there, and the cast design of that's moulded into it is really nice. It's subtle, it's not overdone, and I think that looks very nice and very convincing for the scale. And up here you can see parts of the seats, the seat backs and what have you. And then this is the hatch for the driver. And we'll pop that one down there. The next large sprue contains various parts of the suspension, torsion bar suspension system, with one of the bits that's come adrift just there, and various other bits such as the tarp roll and the machine gun sort of mantlet, which again has the cast texture, the exhaust covers up here, and the ends for the tow cables, which I showed you earlier, which were in rubber. And then we've got things like the shovels and such up here with a little bit of flash evident on these. And yeah, there's a very slight amount of flash on things like the machine guns. Whoops, the machine guns and such up here. Not huge, it's not really bad, but there is a little. And then the main 76mm gun halves have a little bit of flash on as well. So we'll see how much dressing up that needs once they're assembled, but hopefully it won't be too bad. So this particular sprue, there does seem to be a little bit of flash evident, but again, very clean, crisply moulded and quite slim. The things like the fenders, which hopefully you can see and get an idea of how sort of slim they are in the moulding. Next up we have the lower hull, and I'll show you the underside first of all, because this is very nicely moulded. Apart from a nub here which is going to need dressing down, it has the access hatches moulded underneath, which is nice to see, because a lot of tanks that I've looked at, and admittedly I've only looked at the cheaper sort of older Tamiya type tanks, they tend to be missing this underside detail, or they're the older tanks with the motorized bits, so they've got slots cut where you would have the switches and such like. Then you've got these slots on the side for the suspension system and boxes that fit inside there. The inner of the hull is very basic, with just a few slots for the seats and the steering mechanism, as mentioned earlier. So this will require painting white up to probably about this area here where the engine would be, so that if the hatch is left open, which I think I probably will do, the seats will be visible with some of the white interior. So we'll see how visible that is, because obviously it's missing a whole bunch of stuff further back. So we'll see how visible it is once it's assembled. The next part is the upper part of the hull. I'll just focus on that. Again, very nicely cast with very nice scale thickness fenders, as you can see, incredibly thin as they would be on the real thing, and a much more realistic appearance of scale than a lot of the, well, certainly than the last 7/2 scale one that I did. And very nice moulding on the rear with riveted sections and what have you. The underside, a few ejector pin marks, but none of that will be visible at all once it's assembled. And then the final sprue in the kit is the turret assembly and a few bits and pieces that go onto the fenders and the engine bay cover, that kind of thing, and these boxes which fit onto the back. So you've got the turret, and again, talking about that cast texture, the turret also has that really nice cast texture. And one thing I note about this kit is it does have the twin hatches on top of the turret, and I know that was a later modification on the T-34, because originally it only had one hatch, which made evacuation of the tank incredibly difficult and dangerous for the crew. and then the lower section of the turret there, and again quite clean on the underside, but again none of that will actually be visible once fitted. The hatches do have a little bit of moulding detail for the handles, and a bit of an eject pin mark there, so I suppose this could be modelled with the hatches open, but that would make it evident that there's not a great deal inside of the turret, I think. Although it does have the breech assembly, so maybe that wouldn't be so bad, but that would obviously require the eject pin mark filling as well. So that's the final part of the sprue, and that is the kit or the kit parts as it stands currently. And the next step, as ever, is to give all of the parts a bit of a wash and then leave those to dry off, and then we can begin assembly. So join us for the next video, and thank you for watching.